I know we keep using the USA as the main example here, but even in the UK, it seems to be that the political divide is the largest that I've ever witnessed in my 24 years on this planet. I'm not from England. I'm from Wales, so I don't want to speak for England, but I feel like I a good enough view to comment on that as well. But it seems as though there's no room for conversation anymore. Why do you think we've moved away from being able to have debates that don't spiral into outrage, that don't spiral into violence, and conversations where, firstly, we can listen to someone else's opinion, and secondly, we can always, agree to disagree. We can't seem to do that anymore.
Well, I think there are two things going on. The more interesting answer to your question is that human society is built on an evolutionary substrate. That is to say, the way that we interact with each other is an ancient mode, but it is now occurring in a thoroughly novel form. The idea of us having conversations like you and I are now having. Is this a face-to-face conversation? Is this a transatlantic conversation? It's obviously both. Is it a very personal conversation in some ways? Yes. Are we friends? I've never met you. On the other hand, we've spent, more than an hour in conversation. So all of these things are new. And the point I'm trying to make is that evolutionarily, we always say that creatures are adapted to their environment. Creatures are not adapted to their environment. They are adapted to the environment of their ancestors. And usually those two things are very similar. When the environment of a creature has changed, it will very frequently suffer from diseases of maladaptation. And the problem is even worse when the rate of change is so high that the process of evolution cannot catch up. So we are living in a hyper-novel environment. That is, in fact, the subject of the book that my wife and I will release this year, Hyper-Novelty. And the point would be, in environments like Twitter and Facebook and the world of online media, new phenomena emerge. They may be born of very mundane considerations, like how to get eyeballs to look at a particular piece of content so that an advertiser will pay to append their product to it. But what we don't understand is that tiny little perturbations in the way that we interact may have massive repercussions. So, sorry, this has been a long-winded answer, but the thing I fear, something I said on the Dark Horse podcast some weeks ago, was that we are told, and many people are familiar with the line of logic that says that we are being fed outrage or things that will outrage us in order to keep us engaged, and that in some sense we want that, or that we want to hear our own opinions reflected back at us. And I think this is far too simple. I believe, based on conversations like the one you and I are having, conversations that we see across the intellectual dark web and in many heterodox corners of the podcast world, we see that people tune in to be challenged. And that shouldn't surprise us. We were also told that they needed sitcoms that were so dumb they could sit mindlessly in front of the TV, but it turns out they like Game of Thrones. So there is a willingness to engage complex, challenging ideas. The problem, though, I think, or at least one of them, is that because the business model of the internet is so thoroughly based around advertising, and because you are only a good consumer when your conscious mind is turned off and you are taking in content on autopilot, that even though the people who are engaged with the internet might be ready to level up and deal with more challenging, complex content, that those who are most valuable, those who are compliant and ready to be persuaded by an attractive model that some vehicle is more valuable than they would otherwise have thought, those people are the goal because that's where the money comes from. So in other words, I fear that the internet is evolving to lure us into an unconscious state in order to make us compliant consumers, and that the byproduct of being lured into that unconscious state is that we are engaging content that does not cause us to rise to consciousness, and we may sleepwalk into an absolute catastrophe.